A Roman empress reportedly challenged a common prostitute to a 24-hour sex marathon and actually won. A Korean crown prince was slowly and deliberately starved to death inside a wooden rice chest, an order given by his own father, the king. Two young English princes, heirs to the throne, walked into the Tower of London one day and then simply vanished forever, while their uncle claimed the crown. A future king of England was embroiled in a public scandal that forced him to testify in court about a high-stakes card game where his close friend was accused of cheating. Queen became so fixated on her dead husband that she refused to be parted from his corpse, even taking his coffin with her on her travels for years. One of England's most famous kings, known for his many wives, had one of them, Queen Anne Boleyn, executed after she was accused of truly shocking crimes, including incest with her own brother and plotting the king's death. Number 14. The king who testified in court about cheating at cards. Imagine this. The future king of England, a man known for his love of pleasure and high society, caught up in a messy public scandal involving accusations of cheating at a card game. This actually happened to Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII, back in 1890. The incident became known as the Tranby Croft Scandal, or the Royal Baccarat Scandal. It all started at a house party at Tranby Croft, a Yorkshire mansion. Prince of Wales was a guest, and one of his favorite pastimes was playing baccarat, a card game often involving large sums of money. During the game, one of the players, Sir William Gordon Cumming, a decorated lieutenant colonel and friend of the prince, was accused by other guests of illicitly adding to his stake after the cards were dealt. Basically, instead of the matter being handled discreetly, word got out. Sir William, under pressure, and perhaps to protect the prince from being directly involved in a public mess, signed a document promising never to play cards again in exchange for the silence of all present. Silence is a rare commodity when such juicy gossip is involved. The story leaked, and Sir William, his reputation in tatters, sued his accusers for slander. This is where it got really awkward for the royals. Trial took place in June 1891, and the Prince of Wales himself was called as a witness. There he was, the heir to the British throne, sitting in a courtroom giving evidence about a gambling dispute. While he wasn't accused of cheating himself, his presence and involvement in the high-stakes game and the attempt to cover up the initial accusation didn't look good. Press had a field day. Sir William lost his case, and his military and social career was ruined. Prince's reputation took a hit too, with many people feeling his lifestyle was unbecoming for a future monarch. It was a stark reminder that even royals couldn't always escape the consequences of their private lives becoming public spectacles. Number 13. The queen who carried her husband's corpse everywhere. This story sounds like something out of a Gothic horror novel, but it's a historical account about Juana of Castile, a Spanish queen from the late 15th and early 16th centuries. She became known as Juana la Loca, or Joanna the Mad, and her life was filled with passion, tragedy, and deeply unsettling behavior, particularly concerning her husband, Philip the Handsome. Juana was deeply in love with Philip, who was an Archduke of Austria, and became King of Castile through their marriage. By all accounts, Philip was indeed handsome, but also reportedly unfaithful and more interested in power than in Juana. Her jealousy and possessiveness were legendary even while he was alive. When Philip died suddenly in 1506 at the young age of 28, possibly from typhoid fever, though rumors of poisoning swirled, Juana's already fragile emotional state seemed to shatter. She refused to allow his body to be buried immediately. Instead, she ordered his coffin to accompany her on her journeys across Castile. For months, the grieving queen, heavily pregnant at the time of his death, traveled with her husband's embalmed corpse. Reports from the time claim she would frequently have the coffin opened so she could gaze upon his face, sometimes even kissing his feet. She was also said to be fiercely protective of the body, allowing no women, especially nuns, near it, perhaps fearing even in death he might be unfaithful or that they might use magic on him. This macabre procession went on for a considerable time. Eventually, her father Ferdinand II of Aragon intervened. He had his own political reasons to declare Juana mentally unfit to rule, as it allowed him to take control of Castile as regent. Juana was confined to a castle in Tordesillas, and Philip's body was finally interred nearby. She remained in that castle for over 40 years until her death, mostly isolated from the outside world. Whether her actions stemmed purely from overwhelming grief, a pre-existing mental illness exacerbated by her circumstances, or if her madness was exaggerated by those who wanted to usurp her power, remains a topic of discussion for historians. But the image of the Queen, wandering the countryside with her dead husband, is undeniably shocking. Number 12. The Crown Prince, his teenage mistress, and their tragic end in a hunting lodge. The Mayerling incident is one of those dark, romantic, and ultimately tragic royal scandals that has fueled speculation and imagination for over a century. It involves Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria, the heir to the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his young lover, Baroness Mary Vetsera. Rudolf was an intelligent but deeply unhappy man. He was in a politically arranged and loveless marriage with Princess Stephanie of Belgium. He held liberal political views that clashed sharply with those of his conservative father, Emperor Franz Joseph I. He felt stifled, misunderstood, and increasingly desperate. In late 1888, he met the 17-year-old Baroness Mary Vetsera, who became utterly infatuated with him. They began a passionate, secret affair. On January 30th, 1889, the bodies of 30-year-old Crown Prince Rudolf and Mary Vetsera were discovered at his imperial hunting lodge in Mayerling, a small village southwest of Vienna. The initial, official story put out by the imperial court was that Rudolf had died of a heart attack. This quickly unraveled as details began to leak. Truth was far more scandalous. It appeared to be a murder-suicide. Rudolf had shot Mary Vetsera, and then, several hours later, shot himself. The imperial family was thrown into a panic. Suicide was a grave sin, and the idea of the heir to the throne killing his mistress and then himself was a catastrophe for the image of the Habsburg dynasty. A massive cover-up operation swung into action. Mary Vetsera's body was secretly removed from Mayerling and buried in a village cemetery with minimal ceremony, her death certificate falsified. Rudolf was officially declared to have died in a state of mental imbalance, to allow him a Catholic burial. The exact reasons behind their actions remain debated. Was it a pact of despair because the emperor forbade their relationship, or because Rudolf couldn't get a divorce? Was Rudolf suffering from severe depression, perhaps exacerbated by syphilis, as some evidence suggests? Were there political pressures that pushed him over the edge? Whatever the precise trigger, the Mayerling incident sent shockwaves across Europe. It deprived the empire of its direct heir, contributing to the instability that would eventually lead to World War I after the assassination of Rudolf's cousin, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The story of the doomed lovers at Mayerling remains a haunting tale of forbidden love and royal despair. Number 11. The king who reportedly stole a famous watch from Winston Churchill. King Farouk of Egypt, who reigned from 1936 to 1952, was a figure of incredible contrasts. He ascended to the throne as a slim, popular young monarch, but by the end of his reign he was massively overweight, deeply unpopular, and known for his extravagant, often bizarre behavior. One of the most persistent and shocking stories about him was his alleged kleptomania, an uncontrollable urge to steal things, often shiny or valuable objects. Farouk lived a life of immense luxury and self-indulgence. He had a voracious appetite, not just for food. He was known to drink dozens of bottles of soda a day and eat caviar by the spoonful, but also for possessions. He amassed huge collections of everything from stamps and coins to aspirin bottles and Fabergé eggs, but it wasn't just about collecting. Whispers grew louder and louder that he also had sticky fingers. Numerous anecdotes circulated about Farouk's thievery. He was said to have pickpocketed dignitaries and guests at his own palace. One of the most famous stories, though difficult to definitively prove, involves Winston Churchill. During World War II, Churchill visited Egypt. Legend has it that King Farouk managed to relieve the British Prime Minister of his valuable gold pocket watch. Churchill, upon discovering the loss, was reportedly furious. Whether the watch was ever returned, or how the situation was smoothed over if it happened, is part of the enduring legend. Another story tells of him swiping a ceremonial sword from the Shah of Iran during a state visit. His thievery wasn't limited to grand objects. He supposedly took small, everyday items too, if they caught his eye. His palaces were filled with treasures, some legitimately acquired, others perhaps less so. This behavior, combined with his opulent lifestyle, political corruption under his rule, and Egypt's defeat in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, led to widespread discontent. In 1952, a military coup led by Gamal Abdel Nasser overthrew Farouk. He was forced into exile in Italy, taking with him a vast fortune. He died in Rome in 1965, fittingly, after a typically enormous meal. The stories of his kleptomania, whether entirely true or exaggerated, painted a picture of a monarch completely out of touch with his people and reality, a man whose appetites, including the one for other people's belongings, knew no bounds. Number 10. The she-wolf queen who overthrew her own husband. Isabella of France, who lived from around 1295 to 1358, earned the formidable nickname the She-Wolf of France for a reason. She was the queen consort of King Edward II of England, and their marriage was, to put it mildly, a disaster. Edward II was widely believed to favor male companions, most notably Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser the Younger, showering them with titles, lands, and affection, while often neglecting and humiliating Isabella. Isabella was a Capetian princess, daughter of the powerful King Philip IV of France. She was beautiful, intelligent, and not someone to be trifled with. For years, she endured her husband's behavior and the political instability it caused. However, the influence of the Despensers, who became virtual rulers of England and alienated many nobles, pushed Isabella to her breaking point. In 1325, Isabella was sent to France on a diplomatic mission to negotiate a peace treaty with her brother, King Charles IV of France. Once there, she refused to return to England as long as the Despensers remained in power. More shockingly, she openly began an affair with Roger Mortimer, an exiled English nobleman who had his own grievances against Edward II and the Despensers. Together, Isabella and Mortimer became the focal point of opposition to Edward's rule. They gathered a small army and in 1326 launched an invasion of England. It was a remarkably successful venture. Many English nobles, fed up with Edward and the Despensers, flocked to Isabella's banner. The Despensers were captured and brutally executed. King Edward II himself was captured and forced to abdicate the throne in favor of his young son, Edward III, in January 1327. Isabella and Mortimer effectively ruled England as regents. What happened to Edward II is shrouded in grim mystery. He was imprisoned and, according to popular though not definitively proven accounts, he was murdered in Berkeley Castle later in 1327 in a particularly gruesome manner, supposed by having a red-hot poker inserted into his anus, a method that would leave no external marks and was alleged homosexuality. Isabella and Mortimer's rule lasted only a few years. In 1330, the young King Edward III, now 18, staged a coup, had Roger Mortimer executed for treason, and placed his mother Isabella under comfortable house arrest for the rest of her life. While her power was broken, Isabella, the she-wolf, had already left an indelible and bloody mark on English history, a queen who dared to raise an army against her king and husband, and won. Number 9. The diamond necklace that ruined a queen who never even owned it. The affair of the diamond necklace is one of history's most infamous con jobs, and it had devastating consequences for Queen Marie Antoinette of France, even though she was largely an innocent victim in the scheme. This scandal, unfolding in the 1780s, just a few years before the French Revolution, further tarnished her already damaged reputation and fueled the public's hatred for the monarchy. At the center of the affair was a breathtakingly expensive diamond necklace. It was originally commissioned by King Louis XV for his mistress, Madame du Barry, but he died before it was completed. The Parisian jewelers, Baumer and Bassange, were left with an incredibly valuable piece they couldn't easily sell. It was worth around 2 million livres, an astronomical sum at the time. Enter Jeanne de Valois Saint-Remy, a con artist who claimed to be a descendant of a former French royal line and called herself Comtesse de la Motte. She hatched an elaborate plot targeting Cardinal de Rohan, a prominent and ambitious churchman who was desperate to regain favor with Queen Marie Antoinette, who disliked him. John de la Motte convinced Rohan that the Queen secretly wanted the diamond necklace, but couldn't buy it openly due to the country's financial problems. Jeanne claimed she was a confidant of the Queen and could act as an intermediary. She even arranged a fake nighttime meeting in the gardens of Versailles between Rohan and a prostitute disguised as Marie Antoinette, who gave Rohan a rose and a few words of encouragement. Rohan was completely duped. He agreed to guarantee payment for the necklace on the Queen's behalf. Once Jeanne de la Motte got her hands on the necklace, she and her husband quickly had it broken up, and the individual diamonds were sold off in London and Paris. When the jewelers didn't receive their payment from Rohan, and Rohan couldn't get the Queen, who knew nothing about it, to pay, the scandal erupted. A public trial ensued in 1786. While Jeanne de la Motte was eventually convicted and punished, though she later escaped and published scandalous memoirs, and Cardinal de Rohan was acquitted, the damage to Marie Antoinette's reputation was immense. Despite being innocent of trying to acquire the necklace, many people in France, already primed to believe the worst about their Austrian queen known for her extravagant spending, assumed she was somehow involved in this shady deal. Pamphlets and caricatures portrayed her as deceitful, greedy, and immoral. The affair of the diamond necklace became a symbol of the perceived corruption and decadence of the French court, pushing France one step closer to revolution. Number 8. The prince who was suffocated in a rice chest by his own father. This is a truly horrifying story from 18th century Korea, involving Crown Prince Sado and his father, King Yeongjo of Joseon. It's a tale of immense family dysfunction, political intrigue, and an almost unbelievable act of filicide, the killing of one's own child. Crown Prince Sado, born in 1735, was King Yeongjo's second son, but became the heir apparent after his elder brother's early death. From a young age, Sado showed signs of intelligence, but also a volatile temperament. As he grew older, His behavior reportedly became increasingly erratic and violent. Accounts mostly from his wife, Lady Haegyung's memoirs and official court records, which could have been biased, describe him suffering from severe mental illness. He was said to have fits of rage, to be abusive towards palace staff, and even to have killed people. He also reportedly engaged in bizarre behaviors like wandering outside the palace in disguise and developing an obsession with clothes. King Yongzhou, a stern Confucian ruler, was deeply disappointed and increasingly alarmed by his son's conduct. He frequently berated Sado, and their relationship deteriorated catastrophically. There were also political factions at court, and some historians suggest that Sado's enemies may have exaggerated his misdeeds or provoked him to further discredit him. The situation came to a horrifying climax in the summer of 1762. King Yongzhou, possibly convinced that Sado was incurably mad, a threat to the dynasty, or perhaps even plotting against him, made a drastic decision. Because Sado was a crown prince, he could not be executed by conventional means without implicating the royal lineage in a profound way. So, the king ordered Sado to climb into a large wooden rice chest, about 4 feet square. The chest was then sealed, and Prince Sado, then 27 years old, was left inside in the scorching summer heat. He remained in the chest for 8 days, slowly dying of suffocation and starvation. His pleas and cries for help were ignored. After his death, King Yongzhou gave him the posthumous title Sado, meaning thinking of with great sorrow, a rather ironic name given the circumstances. The incident was deeply traumatic for the Joseon dynasty. Sado's son, who would later become King Zhongzhou, was deeply affected by his father's tragic fate and spent much of his reign trying to rehabilitate Sado's image and honor his memory. The story of Prince Sado remains one of the most shocking and disturbing episodes in Korean royal history, a brutal illustration of the pressures and cruelties that could exist within even the most powerful families. Number 7. The fairy tale king who was declared mad and died a mysterious death. King Ludwig II of Bavaria is one of history's most enigmatic and romantic royal figures. Often called the Swan King or the Fairy Tale King, he is famous for building extravagant, dreamlike castles such as Neuschwanstein, the very castle that inspired Disney's Sleeping Beauty castle. But his life was far from a fairy tale, ending in mystery and tragedy. Ludwig ascended to the Bavarian throne in 1864. At the young age of 18, he was handsome and initially popular, but he was also an intensely private, eccentric, and reclusive individual. He had a passionate love for art, music, especially the operas of Richard Wagner, whom he lavishly patronized, and architecture. He increasingly withdrew from the day-to-day affairs of governing, preferring to immerse himself in his fantasy worlds and his ambitious, incredibly expensive building projects. His castles, Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Herrenchiemsee, were monuments to his imagination, but they also drained the royal coffers. Ludwig borrowed heavily to finance them, leading to immense debts. His ministers became increasingly concerned about his spending, his reclusiveness, and his apparent detachment from reality. Rumors circulated about his mental state and his personal life. He never married, and historians generally agree he was homosexual, which would have been a source of immense personal conflict and societal pressure at the time. By 1886, the Bavarian government had had enough. They compiled a medical report based largely on second-hand accounts and accusations from disgruntled servants that declared King Ludwig II insane and incapable of ruling. The specific diagnosis was paranoia. On June 10, 1886, a commission arrived at Neuschwanstein to formally depose him, but Ludwig, forewarned, had them arrested. However, A second attempt by the Commission on June 12th was successful. Ludwig was taken into custody and transported to Berg Castle, on the shores of Lake Starnberg. His uncle, Prince Luitpold, became Prince Regent. What happened next is the subject of enduring mystery. On the evening of June 13, 1886, just one day after arriving at Berg Castle, Ludwig went for a walk along the lakeshore with Dr. Bernhard von Gotten, the psychiatrist who had been instrumental in declaring him insane. Neither man returned. Hours later, their bodies were found in the shallow waters of the lake. The official explanation was that Ludwig had tried to escape by drowning himself, and Dr. Gotten drowned while trying to stop him. However, many inconsistencies and unanswered questions surround this account. Ludwig was a strong swimmer. No water was found in his lungs during the autopsy, suggesting he may not have drowned. There were reports of suspicious marks on Dr. Godden's body, and some even claimed to have heard gunshots. Theories abound. Was it a genuine suicide and accidental drowning? Was Ludwig murdered? Perhaps by government agents who feared he might regain power or expose their conspiracy. Did he suffer a heart attack or stroke while trying to escape? The truth of King Ludwig II's death remains elusive, adding another layer of myth to the life of the fairy tale king. His castles, however, stand as his lasting legacy, drawing millions of visitors each year, captivated by the vision of a king who dared to dream too extravagantly. Number 6. The king who gave up an empire for love and faced Nazi rumors. The story of King Edward VIII abdicating the British throne for Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, is one of the most famous royal scandals of the 20th century. It was a constitutional crisis that shook the British monarchy to its core. But the scandal didn't end with the abdication. Rumors and concerns about the couple's alleged sympathies with the Nazi regime in Germany added a darker dimension to their story. Edward became king in January 1936 upon the death of his father, King George V. He was popular, seen as modern and Medoc. However, he was deeply in love with Wallis Simpson, an American socialite who was in the process of divorcing her second husband. In 1930s Britain, the idea of the king, who is also the supreme governor of the Church of England, marrying a twice-divorced woman whose ex-husbands were still alive, was unthinkable. Church, the government, and much of the public strongly opposed it. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin presented Edward with three choices: give up Wallis Simpson, marry her against the government's advice, which would lead to the government's resignation and a constitutional crisis, or abdicate. Edward chose Wallis. On December 10, 1936, he signed the instrument of abdication, and the next day he made a poignant radio broadcast to the empire, famously saying, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." His younger brother Albert, Duke of York, became King George VI, Queen Elizabeth II's father. Edward, now styled the Duke of Windsor, married Wallis Simpson in France in 1937. The royal family largely ostracized them. Wallis was not granted the style Her Royal Highness, which deeply embittered the Duke. But beyond the family drama, more troubling concerns arose about their political leanings. In October 1937, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor visited Nazi Germany against the advice of the British government. They met Adolf Hitler at his Berghof retreat in Bavaria. The Duke was photographed giving what appeared to be Nazi salutes, and he was reportedly impressed by Germany's industrial and social programs. Throughout World War II, there were persistent fears within the British government that the Nazis might try to use the Duke of Windsor, perhaps even by reinstalling him as a puppet king, if Britain were defeated. He was made governor of the Bahamas during the war, a move seen by some as a way to keep him far from the European conflict and potential Nazi influence. Declassified documents years later, known as the Marburg Files, revealed alleged German plots involving the Duke, though his level of awareness or complicity remains debated. He always denied any pro-Nazi sympathies, claiming his visit was about promoting peace. However, the association cast a long shadow over his and Wallace's legacy, adding a layer of political intrigue to their already sensational love story. Number 5. The Mystic, who held a royal family spellbound while an empire crumbled. Grigory Rasputin is one of history's most notorious and controversial figures, a Siberian peasant mystic whose influence over the Russian imperial family, particularly Tsarina Alexandra, became a massive scandal and contributed to the downfall of the Romanov dynasty. Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg around 1903, gaining a reputation as a holy man, a starets, spiritual elder, with healing powers. He was introduced to Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra in 1905. The imperial couple was desperate because their only son and heir, Tsarevich Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a genetic condition that prevents blood from clotting properly, making any injury potentially life-threatening. Orthodox medicine could do little for Alexei. Remarkably, Rasputin seemed to be able to ease Alexei's suffering during bleeding episodes, often through prayer and calming presence. Some suggest he may have employed folk remedies, or even a form of hypnotism, or perhaps his insistence on stopping doctors from administering aspirin, a blood thinner, though its properties weren't fully understood then, inadvertently helped. Whatever the reason, Tsarina Alexandra became utterly devoted to Rasputin, seeing him as a man sent by God to save her son. This devotion gave Rasputin unprecedented access and influence at the imperial court. Alexandra, especially when Nicholas II was away at the front during World War I, increasingly relied on Rasputin's advice, not just for personal matters but also for political appointments and state affairs. Ministers were hired and fired based on Rasputin's whims or recommendations. This was disastrous. Rasputin was uneducated, often crude, and known for his scandalous behavior, including heavy drinking and alleged sexual promiscuity. He was rumored to have affairs with aristocratic women, and some even whispered, falsely, that he was having an affair with the Tsarina herself. The Russian public and nobility were horrified by Rasputin's sway over the imperial family. He became a symbol of the corruption and decay of the Romanov regime. Pamphlets and cartoons depicted him as a demonic figure controlling this Tsar and Tsarina. His influence undermined the credibility of the monarchy at a time when Russia was struggling with war, food shortages, and growing revolutionary sentiment. In December 1916, a group of conservative nobles, including Prince Felix Yusupov and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's cousin, decided to assassinate Rasputin to save the monarchy from his destructive influence. According to Yusupov's dramatic account, they lured Rasputin to a palace, fed him cakes and wine laced with cyanide, which seemed to have no effect, then shot him multiple times. Even then, he supposedly revived and tried to escape before being shot again, and finally drowned in the icy Neva River. Rasputin's murder, however, did not save the monarchy. It came too late. Just a few months later, in March 1917, the February Revolution erupted, and Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate, bringing an end to 3 centuries of Romanov rule. Rasputin remains a figure of dark fascination, a peasant who held an empire in his thrall. Number 4. The empress who allegedly held a sex competition with a prostitute and won. Valeria Messalina, the third wife of the Roman Emperor Claudius, has gone down in history as one of the most sexually voracious and depraved women of antiquity. Her name became synonymous with promiscuity and ruthless ambition. While it's important to note that historical accounts from ancient Rome were often written by political enemies and prone to exaggeration and slander, the stories about Messalina are so numerous and detailed that they paint a truly shocking picture. Messalina married Claudius before he unexpectedly became emperor in 41 AD. She was much younger than him, beautiful, and wielded considerable influence. She bore Claudius 2 children, Britannicus and Octavia. However, according to Roman historians like Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny the Elder, she used her position to satisfy her insatiable sexual desires and to eliminate anyone who stood in her way or knew too much about her affairs. She was accused of forcing noblemen and women into affairs with her, and of having those who refused or displeased her exiled or executed on trumped-up charges. Palace, it was said, became a veritable brothel under her influence. Perhaps the most infamous story about Messalina, recounted by Pliny the Elder, describes a sex competition she supposedly held with Scylla, a well-known Roman prostitute. The challenge was to see who could have sex with the most men in a 24-hour period. According to Pliny, Messalina won triumphing after 25 partners. This tale, whether true or a fabrication, perfectly encapsulated the reputation she acquired. Her audacity apparently knew no bounds. The most shocking scandal, and the one that ultimately led to her downfall, occurred in 48 AD. While Emperor Claudius was away from Rome visiting the port of Ostia, Messalina went through a marriage ceremony with her lover, Gaius Silius. Silius was a handsome senator, whom she had forced to divorce his own wife. This wasn't just an affair, it was a public bigamous marriage, a direct challenge to Claudius's authority and effectively an act of treason. Some historians suggest Silius and Messalina planned to depose Claudius and rule together, with Silius perhaps adopting Messalina's son Britannicus. When Claudius learned of this, his powerful freedmen, particularly Narcissus, convinced the usually indecisive emperor that Messalina and Silius posed a grave threat. Narcissus took control of the situation, ordering the arrest and execution of Silius and many others involved in Messalina's circle. Messalina herself sought refuge in the gardens of Lucullus. Claudius was reportedly wavering, perhaps inclined to forgive her. Fearing this, Narcissus, according to Tacitus, sent soldiers to execute her without waiting for Claudius's direct order. She was killed in the gardens, at the age of about 28 or 30. After her death, the Senate ordered a damnatio memoriae, an attempt to erase her from public record by destroying her statues and removing her name from inscriptions. But her scandalous reputation has endured for millennia. Number 3. The Queen put on public trial for adultery by her hateful husband. The story of Queen Caroline of Brunswick and King George IV of Great Britain is one of the most bizarre and scandalous royal soap operas in history. Their marriage was a disaster from the moment they met, and their mutual hatred culminated in a sensational public trial where the king tried to divorce his queen for adultery. Caroline, a German princess, married George, then Prince of Wales, in 1795. It was an arranged marriage primarily to secure George's finances, as Parliament had promised to pay off his enormous debts if he wed. George was already secretly and illegally married to Maria Fitzherbert. He found Caroline coarse, unhygienic, and unattractive. Legend has it he called for brandy upon first meeting her, and spent much of their wedding night drunk in the fireplace. They separated shortly after the birth of their only child, Princess Charlotte, in 1796. Caroline, effectively banished from court, began living a rather unconventional life, both in England and later abroad in Europe. Rumors swirled about her behavior, her numerous male companions, and her general lack of decorum. George, meanwhile, lived openly with his mistresses. In 1806, a delicate investigation was launched into rumors that Caroline had given birth to an illegitimate child. She was cleared of that specific charge, but criticized for her undignified conduct. The real fireworks began when George's father, King George III, died in 1820, and George IV ascended to the throne. He was determined to prevent Caroline from becoming queen. He offered her a large sum of money to stay abroad and renounce her title. Caroline, however, was equally determined. She returned to England to a surprisingly enthusiastic, popular welcome. Many ordinary people saw her as a victim of a cruel and decadent king and rallied to her cause. George IV, furious, pressured his government to introduce a bill in the House of Lords called the Pains and Penalties Bill. This bill aimed to strip Caroline of her title as queen and dissolve her marriage to George, essentially putting her on trial for adultery, specifically with her Italian servant Bartolomeo Pergami. Trial, which began in August 1820, was a national sensation. The newspapers were filled with lurid details of Caroline's alleged indiscretions during her travels in Italy and the Mediterranean. Witnesses, many of them disgruntled former servants, testified about her overly familiar behavior with Pergami, sleeping in the same tent, bathing together, and other intimate acts. Caroline's defense lawyers, however, did a masterful job of discrediting the witnesses and highlighting the king's own notorious immorality and his cruel treatment of Caroline. Public sympathy largely remained with the Queen. The bill passed the House of Lords by a very narrow margin, but the government, fearing public unrest and defeat in the House of Commons, withdrew it. Caroline had, in a sense, won. However, her triumph was short-lived. When George IV's coronation took place in July 1821, Caroline tried to attend, but was humiliatingly turned away from Westminster Abbey, her entry barred by armed guards. Just a few weeks later, she fell ill and died. Her death, like her life, was surrounded by drama and suspicion, though most historians believe she died from a bowel obstruction. The saga of George and Caroline remains a shocking example of royal marital warfare played out on a public stage. Number 2. The king, whose wives faced charges of incest, witchcraft, and treason. King Henry VIII of England is famous for many things, founding the Church of England, his formidable presence, and of course his 6 wives. The stories of his marriages are a litany of drama, political maneuvering, and often tragedy. 2 of his queens, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, were executed on his orders after facing truly shocking accusations. Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife, is perhaps the most famous. Henry moved heaven and earth to marry her, breaking with the Roman Catholic Church and declaring himself supreme head of the Church of England when the Pope refused to annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon. He was desperate for a male heir, and Anne promised him one. She gave him a daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, but failed to produce a living son. After just 3 years of marriage, Henry's affections cooled, and he became infatuated with Jane Seymour. Suddenly, Anne Boleyn found herself accused of horrifying crimes. In 1536, she was arrested and charged with adultery with multiple men, incest with her own brother George Boleyn, Lord Rochford, and plotting to kill the king. Some accounts even suggest whispers of witchcraft were used to further blacken her name, implying she had bewitched the king into marrying her. These charges were almost certainly fabricated, a convenient way for Henry and his ambitious minister Thomas Cromwell to get rid of Anne so Henry could marry Jane Seymour and hopefully secure a legitimate male heir. Trial was a sham. Anne and her accused lovers, including her brother, were found guilty based on flimsy evidence and confessions likely extracted under duress or in exchange for leniency that never came. Anne Boleyn was beheaded on Tower Hill on May 19, 1536. maintaining her innocence to the end. Her brother and the other accused men were also executed. Just a few years later, history repeated itself with Henry's fifth wife, Catherine Howard. She was a young, vivacious cousin of Anne Boleyn, and Henry, now aging and obese, was initially besotted with her. However, Catherine had a promiscuous past, and more dangerously, she was reckless enough to allegedly continue indiscreet behavior after becoming queen. In 1541, evidence emerged of her premarital affairs and, more damningly, an alleged affair with a courtier named Thomas Culpeper during her marriage to Henry. When these accusations reached the king, his fury was immense. Catherine Howard was accused of treason, as an adulterous queen was considered to have committed treason against the king. She, along with Culpeper and Francis Derham, one of her premarital lovers, was found guilty. Catherine Howard was executed at the Tower of London in February 1542. She was barely out of her teens. The fates of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard serve as chilling reminders of the absolute power wielded by Henry VIII and the brutal consequences for those even queens who fell from his favor or failed to meet his expectation. Charges of incest and witchcraft against Anne Boleyn in particular were designed to be as shocking and damaging as possible, ensuring public support for her removal. Number 1. The child princes who vanished from a tower, sparking a centuries-old mystery. The story of the Princes in the Tower is one of English history's most enduring and haunting mysteries. It involves two young royal brothers, King Edward V, aged 12, and Richard, Duke of York, aged 9, who disappeared in 1483, leaving behind a riddle that has puzzled historians and captivated the public imagination. When their father, King Edward IV, died unexpectedly in April 1483, young Edward V was proclaimed king. His uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, Edward IV's brother, was named Lord Protector, tasked with governing England until the boy king came of age. Richard of Gloucester moved swiftly. He intercepted young Edward V on his way to London for his coronation and escorted him to the Tower of London, which at the time was a royal residence as well as a prison. Soon after, Richard persuaded Edward IV's widow, Elizabeth Woodville, to allow her younger son Richard, Duke of York, to join his brother in the Tower, ostensibly for their safety and companionship. What happened next is where the facts become murky and the speculation begins. In June 1483, Richard of Gloucester declared that his late brother Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville had been invalid, and therefore their children, including the two princes, were illegitimate. With the princes declared illegitimate, Richard himself was next in line to the throne. He was crowned King Richard III on July 6, 1483. Two young princes, who had been seen playing in the grounds of the Tower of London earlier that summer, were seen less and less frequently. By the late summer or early autumn of 1483, they had vanished completely. They were never seen alive again. The most widely accepted theory popularized by Tudor historians who had a vested interest in blackening Richard III's name as Henry VII defeated Richard to start the Tudor dynasty is that Richard III ordered the murder of his nephews to secure his claim to the throne. This narrative suggests they were smothered with pillows in their sleep and secretly buried within the tower. Supporting this, in 1674, bones believed to be those of two children of roughly the prince's ages were discovered in a wooden chest buried beneath a staircase in the White Tower. King Charles II ordered them interred in Westminster Abbey as the remains of the princes, though modern forensic analysis has not definitively confirmed their identity or cause of death. However, Richard III's guilt is not universally accepted. Some historians have proposed alternatives, suspects, or theories. Could Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, a one-time ally of Richard III who later rebelled against him, have killed them to destabilize Richard's reign or for his own ambitions. Could Henry Tudor, later King Henry VII, who defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, have had them killed later to eliminate rival claimants? There are even theories that one or both princes survived and were smuggled abroad. Despite centuries of debate, no conclusive proof has ever emerged to definitively solve the mystery of what happened to Edward V and Richard, Duke of York. Their disappearance remains a dark and compelling chapter in royal history. A tale of ambition, betrayal, and the tragic fate of two innocent children caught in the brutal power struggles of the Wars of the Roses.